Good morning. You see in an opposite view of my wood shop today, my bench I usually set my camera up on, I got full of some oiled cutting boards there, but so a little different look today and maybe a little bit of a different look at the Bible too. We're in 2 Corinthians 10, which is the New Testament reading for today. Paul talks about his authority. He talks about how in his letter, he says letters, so he's, this is, not just a second letter, but maybe several different missives, letters that he sent to him. He says, in my letters, I seem more forceful. I point things out more than I do when I'm in person. And I think about that in our relationships. I mean, it's easier to, when you're preparing to talk to somebody about something, to be more forceful. But then when you come face to face with the person and you have that conversation, it's more difficult. And we're more gentle a lot of times, when we're face to face. So we're not quite so much in your face, maybe, so to speak. But, he talks about, this waging this war against sin and not boasting of ourselves, but in verse 17 he says, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. And so he's continuing to encourage these people of Corinth in their daily faith walk and in their lives as they lead them. The last few weeks or a couple of weeks or whatever, Proverbs has been the Old Testament reading. And I know one day I commented a little bit on some of the early chapters of Proverbs, especially Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, to trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will guide your paths. But the book of Proverbs is a collection of wisdom sayings. It's some common sense. A lot of it's common sense. And, in so much of the world today, we don't see a lot of common sense, but there's a lot of wisdom in Proverbs. And this is one of the things that Solomon was known for, was his wisdom. And so for the remainder of today's time, I'm going to just kind of briefly page through the book of Proverbs, starting at chapter 6, and just share a few of the things that I have underlined. And I looked through the Bible I have sitting beside my chair in the living room last night, and I have a lot more things underlined, a lot more verses. I mean, sometimes it's just one verse, because sometimes in Proverbs, the first half of the verse is the wisdom says this and the fool says this. And there's a lot of that in there, and a lot of good advice and good things to think about and just to be reminded of. But chapter 6, verse 20 is the first one I want to share briefly. Is, my child, keep your father's commandment and do not forsake your mother's teaching. As parents, as grandparents, as people of community, it's our responsibility to raise children who are responsible, children who can take care of themselves, children who will be an asset to the community. And so here for the advice to the child, keep your father's commandments and do not forsake your mother's teaching. I mean, we teach them. We want them to be the very best they can be. So the encouragement is for the children to listen to the parents. Yeah, and I think that is so great. And then in chapter 8, verse 11, for wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire may not compare with her. Wisdom, not being a wise guy, but having knowledge, especially knowing the difference between good and evil, between right and wrong. Being able to function in society, having an education, being able to do things. I mean, the ability to work with your hands, the ability for your mind to function and to figure things out, that's worth a whole lot more than anything else, than jewels, it says. Jewels are something that are pretty, you can look at, and some of them have value and some of them don't. But wisdom, knowledge is always good. Verse 13 of chapter 8, the fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance are the way of evil, and perverted speech I hate. But The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. The respect of the Lord is to hate evil. When we love God, we don't love evil. And this is just a simple way it is. In chapter 10, I have verse 1 underlined. A wise child makes a glad father, but a foolish child is a mother's grief. And I think it works both ways. It's just, a wise child makes a proud mother, and a foolish child is a father's grief. I mean, we can turn the father and mother's words around there, because when our children do well, we're proud of them, and when they mess up, I mean, it causes us grief. We hurt for them more than anything, because we want them to be. We want them to have good things and to be well. And it's kind of like the other verse that I shared just a couple minutes ago. Verse 9 of chapter 10, whoever walks in integrity walks securely. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely. If you are upright and honest, if you tell the truth, I mean, you walk securely. If you're telling the truth, you don't have to worry about who you told what, because you're going to tell the same thing all the time. So walking in truth, speaking the truth, being filled with integrity, doing the right thing, saying the right thing, gives security. Verse 12, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. And that always makes me think of, in the movie Love Story, at one point where he says, love means never having to say you're sorry. That's not true, and I've shared that before too, but love covers all offenses. You think about God's love for you and me. It's God's love that sent Jesus to die for us. God's love in Jesus Christ covers all of our offenses. I can say that now. Solomon didn't know that when he wrote this about Jesus coming, but he knew that God's love would take care of all of those things. Chapter 10, verse 14, the wise lay up knowledge, but the babbling of a fool brings ruin near. The wise build up knowledge. It's like, the three little pigs. One built a house of straw, having the knowledge, the wise lay up knowledge. So we know how to, I'm talking about myself as being wise, but we learn things, and when we study things, and we all know people that, maybe never graduated from high school, maybe never graduated from 8th grade, that are so filled with knowledge and so able to do things because of their hands-on learning, because of their continued reading of magazines and newspapers, and we can get knowledge in school. Yes, we do, but we learn a lot more by hands-on. I can learn a lot more things in my wood shop by doing it than by reading in a magazine. If I read in a magazine or a book, you can follow the instructions and you can sort of understand. But when you start putting it together, when you're working with your hands, this is when you get the true knowledge. Verse 26 is one I like of chapter 10. Like vinegar to the eyes, to the teeth rather, like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so are the lazy to their employers. What's vinegar to the teeth? It's not sweet, it's sour. What is smoke to the eyes? It's irritating. It makes them itch and burn. So what are the lazy to their employers? An employer is always going to commend the ones who do a better job, and someone who is always slacking off and always, not doing their job. Those people like that are irritations in so many ways. But this is an encouragement to do your job well, to be proud of who you are and what you are, no matter what you're doing, there is no job that is not worth doing and doing well. If it's your job to sweep the floor in the wood shop, well, then do a good job of it, and I'm just using that as an example, because if I don't clean my wood shop once in a while, it just wouldn't be pretty. It would be a big fire hazard. So, it's, take care of the duties that you need to, Chapter 11, verse 13, a gossip goes about telling secrets, but one who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a confidence. And this is one of the most difficult things when somebody asks you, tells you a secret, tells you something in confidence, it's to keep that in confidence. And gossiping isn't always just necessarily breaking a trust that way, but gossip is telling other people things about others that may or may not be true, something that you may not know for sure, or just busybody talk. We all know what that is, and we all know people like that. And that's the way it goes sometimes. Verse 12, or chapter 12, verse 11, those who till their land will have plenty of food, but those who follow worthless pursuits have no sense. Again, taking care of business, making sure that you're doing things at the proper time, and all things that way. Verse 15 of chapter 12, fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to advice. Sometimes we get so set in our ways that, we can't think that there could be any other way of doing it. And I'm guilty of that at times, I know. And sometimes it's hard to listen to the advice in that, but we need to. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness speaks deceitfully, is verse 17 of chapter 12. And again, we speak the truth, and speak the truth in love. We can give honest evidence and speak the truth in love that way. Chapter 13, verse 20, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. We are who we hang out with. We are, if you're in a gang. I mean, I think about, out here in the middle of North Dakota, not quite so bad, but there are gangs in our cities, in Fargo and in Jamestown, and I mean, there are gangs, there are people that hang out, and in our schools, in our local schools, there are cliques, there are societies of, maybe not named as a society, but you're either with the in crowd or you're not, and so it's, be aware of who you're hanging out with. Chapter 14, verse 16, the wise are cautious and turn away from evil, but the fool throws off restraint and is careless. The wise are cautious. Verse 17, the one who is quick-tempered acts foolishly, and the schemer is hatred. That's, quick temper is just not a good thing, and mine can be that way sometimes. Chapter 15, verse 1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Verse 3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on evil and good. A gentle tongue is a tree of life. Chapter 15, verse 7, the lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the mind of fools. Think about that one again. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the mind of a fool. And then to go on in chapter 16, verse 16 of chapter 15, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than a great treasure than trouble. And there are so many little snippets in the book of Proverbs that speak, and here's one I kind of talked a little bit about this. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a downcast spirit dries up the bones. I mean, when we have a positive outlook on life, when we look at the glass as half full, or as we look at today, it's a sunshiny day. It's a little bit chilly, but it's a sunshiny day, and it's another day of fall. And when we have a cheerful heart, when we have a positive outlook on life, I mean, it makes so much difference in who we are, and in how we look at life, and how everything goes for us. I mean, if we go about with a chip on our shoulder, well, it's most likely going to be kind of that type of a day. Chapter 18, verses 17 and 18. The one who first states a case seems right until the other comes and cross-examines. And then it's casting the lot, puts an end to disputes, and decides between powerful contenders. We don't cast lots in today's society, but we do find ourselves in courts of law. We find ourselves, defending our position, or, it's like the one who first states a case seems right, and I could tell you a really good story, and you might believe it, and it might be total falsehood, and when someone cross-examines, those lies would come forth, And we find that a lot in today's society too, that, people are quick to claim something, and then we find out that's not really quite the way it happened. So it's always the admonition for you and for me to make sure we know the whole story. And especially when we go back to thinking about that, gossip spreads malicious stuff, and so, make sure we just don't jump on the bandwagon of the first person that we hear. Chapter 20, verse 1, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. And, it isn't just drink. There are a lot of things, a lot of drugs, a lot of different things. Power is another one that can corrupt a person that way. So, so whoever is led astray by any of those things, need to be wary and to be aware of the power of some of these things that, sometimes it's, you have a drink to loosen up, or you have a drink to relax or something, but, too much isn't good. And, it can mock you that way, and modern health tells us that, a glass of wine can be very beneficial for our health, but a bottle and a half or two a day is definitely not so good, and so it's the mockery that comes, a little bit can be beneficial, but a lot can be very detrimental. So it's, to be wise with our uses of so many different things that way. And the same can be true about using Scripture. I mean, we can use Scripture to make about any point you want to make with it, depending on what you pick and choose. And so I'm kind of just going through the book of Proverbs now, picking and choosing some things that I have underlined, and some good advice, but yet, other people may disagree with some of what I say. Proverbs 25, verse 6, I mean, here's part of something where Jesus comes with a story later on. Solomon writes, do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great, for it is better to be told, come up here, than to be told to move down to a lower place at the table. And Jesus uses that information or that knowledge, in the parable of, going to a banquet, and, don't just assume that you are the guest of honor, that you're the most important person there, because most often, we're not the most important person there. There's a verse in chapter 26 I have underlined that I just laugh at it every time I read it. Like a dog returns to its vomit is a fool who reverts to his folly. And, it's just such a revolting thing, but fools do the same thing over and over and over again. And that's, one of the definitions of insanity is to do the same thing and expect a different result. If you hit yourself on the head, it's going to hurt. If you hit yourself on the head again, it's going to hurt. I mean, and that would be an extreme example, but, a fool will continue to do over and over and over again the same things. And it's one of those things that every time I read that, and I've got it underlined in my Bible, I think probably every Bible I've got that's underlined in, but it's just one of those things that makes me kind of grin and shake my head and just enjoy some of the humor that we find sometimes within the Bible, and the humor we need to look for in our lives each and every day. The Bible is filled with good advice for us, for wisdom, for encouragement in our faith. And that's one of the reasons that I find myself reading it and going back to it and reading the books over and over again. I mean, there are, especially in the Gospels, I couldn't tell you how many times I've read through those. And yet, every once in a while, when I read through the Gospel or a certain story, I see something that makes me think in a totally different manner than I've ever looked at it before. And I think that's one of the ways that God works through the Bible. We call, Jesus is the living word, and the Bible is the written word. And the Bible isn't just the written word that just sits there, but it is a written word that can change and affect who we are. So in a way, the Bible is it's a living word as well, because we can look at it in different ways, in different times, and depending on where we at in life, what's going on in our lives, the Bible can speak to us in different ways. But it always speaks to us of God's love and God's grace.